Hello everyone, and welcome to the first ever mini webisode of the Media Lunch Break podcast. My name is Andrew, and I'd like to talk to you about some nerd stuff today. We take so long to put out full episodes of our podcast that I thought it might be good to give some small individual thoughts and musings that are unique to myself and to Chris. I've decided that a suitable way to launch this segment is to discuss the life and career of Stan Lee. Stan Lee has worked in so many comic book related occupations over the years that it's hard to pin down his direct involvement or influence. That being said, he is easily the mascot of the Marvel franchise, and responsible for shaping the Marvel Universe and characters into the spectacle they are today. And with Black Panther breaking nearly every record in the Guinness Book, it seemed apropos. Since I'm the Marvel fan and Chris is the DC fan, I thought it would be appropriate that I discuss the man who's responsible for giving us the Marvel Universe as we know it today, and Chris maybe could do a video on whoever's responsible for the current DC Universe. Is it Zack Snyder? I think it's Zack Snyder. On the Upper West Side in New York City, Stan Lee was born on December 28, 1922 to two Romanian Jewish immigrants. His birth name was Stanley Martin Lieber. He obviously changed it at a later date, but we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. In 1929, the Great Depression shook America, and New York City was no exception. The Lieber family hit hard times and had to move constantly, eventually ending up in a third-floor walk-up in the Bronx where Stan shared a bedroom with his brother, and his parents slept on a fold-out couch. In his early years, Stan gained a knack and a passion for writing. He wanted to write the next great American novel. He did anything he could to grow as a writer, penning everything from press releases for the National Tuberculosis Center to instructional manuals for the Army to even obituaries for people who were still alive. In 1939, Stan graduated from high school early, at only 16 and a half years old, and applied for a job at a publishing company, unaware that the company only published comics. And in case you're unaware of the public perception of comics at the time, Lee once said in an interview with Larry King, quote, "I didn't know they published comics. I thought it was a real publishing company." I mean, the guy wanted to write the next great American novel, not the next great American graphic novel. Lee worked at Timely Comics for some time, filling a position he referred to as a, quote, gopher, quote, fetching coffee, proofreading, sweeping, and just general busy work. However, shortly thereafter, everyone in Lee's department left and didn't come back, except for Lee. The publisher walked in and asked the young man, who was a dead ringer for a Howdy Doody lookalike contest, by the way, quote, "Who are you?" Lee responded, and the publisher, likely during a morphine-induced lapse of sanity, asked Lee to sub for the editor's position until they found a permanent replacement. Spoiler alert, they didn't! At only 16 and a half years old, Stan Lee became the editor of a well-established publishing company. Timely Comics later evolved into Marvel Comics as Stan Lee grew consistently in rank, and the rest is history. Now for some fun facts! Stan Lee changed his last name from Lieber to Lee with the hopes that when Lieber became a famous novelist, critics wouldn't associate him with Lee, a lowly comic book editor. By 1971, the Comics Code Authority reigned tyrannously over comics. And if you don't know what the Comics Code Authority was, it was a lot like the Hays Code, but for comics. And if you don't know what the Hays Code was, it's a lot like the Federal Communications Commission, but for television. Although the Federal Communications Commission does censor television now, so you know what, I'm just gonna tell you. The Comics Code Authority was a censorship department made by comic companies to put minds at ease. If a parent saw that CCA stamp on the front cover, they knew that little Timmy's brain wouldn't melt if he opened up a picture book that was a little too scary. They included ridiculous rules like, quote, "No comics magazine shall include the word horror or terror in its title." There was also a strict rule forbidding mentioning intoxicants. However, that didn't stop Stan the man. When he received a letter from the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare requesting that he publish an issue tackling drug abuse so kids understand the danger, he worked a subplot into the next issue of Spider-Man. Oh, it's issue 96, by the way. He submitted it to the CCA and they rejected it for mentioning drugs, even though the comic portrayed drug abuse in a negative light. With no other way out, Lee tried one last Hail Mary. He released the comic without the seal of approval of the CCA and waited for the hate mail and fires and pitchforks to come in. But they never came. No one even noticed the seal was missing. And that's how Stan Lee single-handedly took down censorship in comics. You know, it's also difficult to talk about Stan Lee without mentioning his late wife, Joan. When Lee returned for the army, a friend of his tried to set him up with a young woman who worked at a modeling agency. He walked into the modeling agency and met Joan, who was working the front desk. He fell for her immediately. He asked her to lunch, and shortly thereafter they were married. In Stan Lee's immensely understating words, it was a good lunch. Joan is partially responsible for giving us the Marvel Universe. The company refused to put out comics that focused on character and plot. Stan's bread and butter. They asked the writers to stick strictly to fight scenes with as little dialogue as possible. When Lee was thinking of what to do, he asked his wife if he should quit his job. Joan's advice was, write the kind of comic you want to write. If they fire you, you wanted to quit anyway. That comic was the Fantastic Four. Also, if you didn't figure it out by now, Joan wasn't the friend of a friend who worked at the modeling agency. Stan Lee just walked in and saw her first. It's funny how life works out that way. Right, honey? Right? Right? They're gonna think there's nobody there. That's fine. The Fantastic Four was a major turning point for Marvel Comics. They grew to appease the intelligent and the uneducated. Marvel Comics became a universal medium. Stan Lee even said in a 1975 interview, quote, "At Marvel Comics, our vocabulary is college level. Should we want to use a word like proselytize or misanthropic or cataclysmic or what have you, we do. We haven't lost one young reader through elevating the vocabulary and the style of writing, but we've gained an entire new audience." Hey, thanks for watching. My name is Andrew Dunn. I am one half of the hosts from the podcast The Media Lunch Break alongside Chris Triebel, who doesn't know he's about to start doing these, but he does now because I'm going to send him this video. Feel free to check out our podcast on iTunes or Google Play Music or SoundCloud or YouTube, and don't forget to punch that subscribe button as hard as you can. Bye.